This is English shorthand dictation number 142 and the dictation speed is 160 words per minute. Ready? Start. Honorable Speaker Sir, the government is fully cognizant of the employment concerns that our people abroad have in the context of the COVID pandemic. Especially in the Gulf, there has been tremendous economic and social disruption that has impacted them. We have softened it somewhat, but the real challenges are there to be addressed. Let me assure the House that we take this as a priority. Our ambassadors and senior officials spend time and effort to go into these problems in the greatest of details. We have been in regular touch with most community organizations and get their feedback on both the health situation and the economic recovery. We are aware that there are problems of compensation, re-employment and re-skilling that need solutions. These are at the core of our agenda with our partner governments. The welfare of students studying abroad has also been a particular concern to all of us. Across the world, our embassies have been given instructions to reach out to them, monitor their situation, and assist their return where required. As with workers and professionals, the focus has now shifted to the going back to universities. Some countries have been more open in this regard than others, obviously reflecting their particular COVID challenge. Therefore, this remains a high priority and our endeavor will be to encourage an early return to normalcy. Seafarers have been another category requiring particular attention. We have been working with shipping companies across the world to ensure their well-being and wherever required, we are helping them return to India. The challenges presented by crew change procedures were daunting, but the flexibility shown by various stakeholders allowed us to overcome them. Members would also recall the predicament of two crews who were in particular difficulty outside Chinese ports. Their situation was eventually resolved through great perseverance. We continue to interact with many governments to devise more friendly procedures for crew change requirements. Our fishermen have also been affected by the difficulties arising from the pandemic. Particularly, we saw serious problems faced by those who were working out of Iran. Some Gulf nations also witnessed this, perhaps to a lesser degree. Many members had expressed their anxiety at that time, and here too, the repatriation phase is over and the re-employment phase has just started. Let me underline that from the very beginning, the Modi government has been deeply committed to the welfare and protection of Indians abroad. We value and nurture our relationship with the persons of Indian origin. The COVID pandemic was a test of our commitment on this matter, and whether it was the problem of the workers or the students, the professionals or the tourists, we have risen to the occasion. A huge collective effort by nameless and faceless individuals from our embassies and other organizations in India and abroad made that possible. Like the nation at home, they too were inspired by the Prime Minister's leadership and vision. I wish to assure this august House that in the days ahead, as our quest for normalcy progresses, as the global marketplace and workplace resume activities, as centers of study reopen their doors, we will be there to encourage, facilitate, secure, and support. Honorable Speaker Sir, I rise to oppose this bill because of three reasons. Firstly, the bill violates the constitutional principle of separation of powers as it assigns the responsibility of issuing an adoption order to a district magistrate rather than the civil court. An adoption order under Section 61 of the Principal Act requires a deliberation on the welfare of the child and creates legal rights for the child and the adoptive parents. Thus, it has to be a civil court which is the suitable authority to be dealing with this process. Secondly, it further violates the constitutional principle of separation of powers by providing for an appeal against an adoption order to be made to the divisional commissioner instead of giving a civil court the final say over the legal process of adoption. Thirdly, it delegates responsibility to the district magistrate and additional district magistrate, including sanctioning and monitoring child healthcare institutions and overseeing the functioning of various agencies under the Principal Act. This means that the protection of children under the Principal Act suddenly becomes much more dependent on a single authority controlled by the government. For these reasons, I have to oppose the proposed bill because there are major concerns being expressed by stakeholders, experts, and others, which would also warrant reconsideration in addition to the constitutional provisions that I have mentioned today. Honorable Chairman, sir, talking about the revenue side first, there are two primary sources of railways revenue. One is the freight and passenger traffic, and the other is miscellaneous sources. In the freight traffic, as we know, most of the revenue comes from the bulk transport of coal, followed by iron ore, cement, food grains, and fertilizers. We are largely dependent on the bulk transportation of coal. Slowly and gradually, it is decreasing day by day. So, since the share of coal is coming down, I want to understand from the Honorable Minister what exactly are we doing to expand our limited freight basket so that we can increase our revenue. Secondly, the railways have been constantly losing the share of the freight traffic to other modes of transport on account of price competitiveness and the carrying capacity issues. To some extent, a solution has been found by way of the dedicated freight corridors. It is because in India we used to run both the passenger and the freight traffic on the same track. Now we have dedicated freight corridors. Railways have a tendency to utilize the profits earned from the freight traffic to compensate for the losses made in the passenger traffic. Here, what is important to understand is that these are COVID times. Now we hear about the third wave of COVID and we see a fresh series of lockdown in certain cities of India. Of course, I agree that the vaccination drive has started and more than 2 crore people in India have been vaccinated. But what I want to understand from the Honorable Minister whether he is hopeful that the passenger traffic is going to return to normalcy level in these COVID times. It is because we eventually have to be concerned about the losses that we are making in the passenger traffic, which are being compensated by the profits that we make in the freight traffic. The core issue is that the railways have not been able to generate surplus, and that is why we will be sourcing most of the capital expenditure from the budget sources of the government and from the extra budgetary resources, which is not a very favorable situation. The more we rely on our extra budgetary resources, the more the financial situation of the railways is going to worsen. So our operating ratio becoming lower is an important issue. Over the past few years, it has remained at more than 90%. That remains the core issue for the railways to be addressed. Indian Railways is the world's largest passenger carrier and fourth largest freight carrier. It is a safe, efficient and competitive means of transport. Now there are technological advances in Indian Railways. The question before us is how to save Indian Railways from the economic crisis. 90% of the total revenue is from the budgetary means only. The expenditure also is rising on one side. So it is a difficult situation. What we are doing now is damage repair and crisis management. Expenditure on fuel and electricity is also increasing. There are only two ways before us. One is to reduce the expenditure and the other is to develop non-budgetary revenues. With regard to reduction of expenditure, newspapers are reporting that we are going ahead with some moves like freezing new appointments, closure of uneconomic routes, reduction in the manpower, and various other expenditure control methods. We understand the compelling situation of the government. But while implementing cost reduction measures, we have to be very careful and understand the ground reality. This privatization process in the railways is very dangerous. You are doing this privatization without any limits. Indian Railways is the property of the nation. It is very valuable and very precious. If you blindly hand this over to the private sector, it will be very dangerous. Indian Railways has launched the process of opening up the trains operations to private entities on more than 100 destinations. It has invited tenders for that. The Railway Board has moved ahead with its long pending plan, setting a tentative schedule for privatization. Honorable Minister also said that trains like Tejas railways are also going to be handed over to the private sector. I would like to say that the Honorable Minister and the government should think well, and this kind of tendencies should be curbed. If you hand over everything to the private sector, it would be really a threat for the nation. So I humbly request the government to desist from this kind of things. We have to understand the realities. We are prepared to cooperate with the government for rebuilding the railways. We are prepared to play a constructive role in this. However, the government should keep the public property and should not hand it over to private sector like this.